Diana Holland opened her eyes at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before her alarm clock went off. It was a habit she had developed over 30 years of marriage to a man who was never late for work. Richard had died 13 months ago of a heart attack right in the office of his construction company, leaving his wife alone in an empty mansion in the prestigious South Hill neighborhood. The 400-square-meter house now felt like a museum. Diana could go weeks without entering half of the rooms. The living room with the fireplace, where they used to entertain business partners. Richard's study, where his papers still lay in neat piles. The master bedroom had become a reminder of how empty her life had become. At 7 in the morning, Diana ate breakfast alone in the kitchen, overlooking the immaculately manicured lawn. Coffee, avocado toast, local news on the radio. A ritual that helped her not think about the fact that another day without purpose or meaning lay ahead. Richard left her not only the house, but also a share in 3 Holland's Kitchen restaurants scattered around Spokane. 2 in the city center, 1 in a shopping mall in the north. Until her husband's death, Diana rarely interfered in the management of the business. Richard preferred to decide everything himself, while she took care of the house and charity work. Now the restaurants were her only connection to the outside world. Every day at 10 in the morning, Diana would get into her silver Mercedes and drive to the central restaurant on West Main Avenue. She would check the accounts, talk to suppliers, and supervise the staff. Manager Carla Wilson had been running everything for 12 years, but Diana's presence gave her a sense of control over at least part of her life. In mid-October 2023, a new waiter joined the restaurant team. Ethan McCabe, 18, a sophomore at Spokane Community College, was studying business administration. He was tall, thin, with dark hair and serious eyes. He only worked evenings and weekends, combining his job with his studies. Diana noticed him on his first day. He moved around the dining room with natural grace, knew how to approach even the most capricious customers, and never forgot the details of an order. But most importantly, he treated her not as the widow of the late owner, but as a living woman. When she walked through the hall, he smiled at her and asked how she was doing. Simple questions, but they were sincere, which she so desperately needed. For the first few weeks, their communication was limited to short conversations about work. Ethan talked about difficult customers, and Diana gave advice on how to organize the work. Gradually, the conversations became more personal. He mentioned college and how difficult it was to balance his studies and work in order to help his mother financially. She talked about her plans for developing the business and how hard it was to make decisions alone. In November, Diana began staying at the restaurant until late in the evening, until Ethan's shift ended. Officially, she was checking on the evening shift, but in reality, she enjoyed watching him. She liked how he interacted with his colleagues, how he resolved conflicts, how his face lit up with a smile when he saw her. After the restaurant closed, they began talking in the empty dining room. Ethan talked about his plans after college. He dreamed of starting his own business, maybe a cafe or a small restaurant. Diana listened and thought about how she couldn't remember the last time someone had shared their dreams for the future with her. Time had stopped in the past at the house on South Hill. One day in late November, when the first snow had already fallen outside the restaurant windows, Diana offered to drive Ethan home. He lived with his mother in a modest neighborhood in the north of the city, 20 minutes by bus from the center. When the Mercedes stopped at a small house with peeling paint on the porch, the contrast with her mansion became obvious. On the way home, Diana thought for the first time that she felt alive. Being with Ethan made the emptiness that had haunted her for months disappear. He talked to her not as an elderly widow, but as an interesting woman. In his eyes, she saw admiration, not pity. The rides became regular. Then came dinners together at the restaurant after closing. Diana ordered from the menu, Ethan set the table by the window, and they ate by candlelight, just like in a real restaurant. He talked about his classmates, his teachers, and the movies he had seen. She shared memories of her travels with Richard and her views on business prospects. In December, Their relationship crossed a line. After one of these dinners, Ethan took her hand and said that she was a beautiful woman who deserved to be happy. Diana felt something thaw inside her after months of being frozen. When he kissed her, she didn't resist. Their first intimacy did not take place in the house on South Hill, but in a small motel on the outskirts of Spokane. Diana felt awkward and excited at the same time. At 57, she was making love to a man almost 40 years her junior. It was crazy, but for the first time in many months, she felt like a woman and not the shadow of her dead husband. They agreed to keep their relationship a secret. Ethan understood that a relationship with the restaurant owner could create problems at work. Diana feared condemnation, a widow who had not waited out the proper mourning period and had become involved with a boy years younger than her son. But secrets don't stay secret for long in a small town. By January 2024, the restaurant staff had begun to notice the special attention Diana was giving the young waiter. Carla Wilson was the first to dare to hint at the strangeness of the situation when she saw Diana lingering to talk to Ethan after her shift. The gossip spread slowly but surely. Regular customers at the restaurant noticed how often the owner interacted with the young employee. Suppliers noticed that Diana always scheduled appointments for when Ethan was working. Ethan's college friends began joking that he had found a rich sugar mama. In February, the first rumors reached Diana's son. Jason Holland worked as a corporate lawyer for a large firm in Seattle and rarely visited Spokane. But he still had childhood friends in the city, and one of them felt it necessary to tell him about his mother's strange behavior. Ethan's mother, Sarah McCabe, learned of her son's relationship from a colleague at social services, whose friend worked at a nearby cafe and had seen them together. Sarah was shocked. She had raised Ethan alone since he was 10 years old and knew him to be a responsible, serious young man. A relationship with a woman older than his mother seemed inexplicable to her. By March, the rumors had reached a critical mass. In a town the size of Spokane, news travels fast, especially when it involves wealthy people. Diana Holland and the 18-year-old waiter became the topic of conversation in hair salons, cafes, and offices. Some condemned her as an old slut, others him as a gold digger. Diana felt the eyes of the restaurant's customers on her, heard the conversations quiet down as she walked past the tables. But she had no intention of giving up the only thing that brought her joy after her husband's death. For the first time in many months, she woke up looking forward to the day ahead, rather than wanting it to end as soon as possible. Ethan also noticed the change in the attitude of those around him. His classmates looked at him with curiosity and envy. His colleagues at the restaurant behaved in an overly formal manner. His mother avoided talking about his job, but he did not regret his choice. Diana was the first woman who took him seriously, who saw him not just as a student working part-time as a waiter, but as a person with plans and ambitions. By the end of March, their relationship had moved to a new level. Ethan began staying overnight at the house on South Hill. The huge, empty rooms were filled with life. They had breakfast together in the kitchen, discussed plans for the day, and watched movies in the living room with the fireplace. Diana bought him clothes, paid for his college tuition, and gave him money for small expenses. For her, he was not just a lover, but also a companion she had been sorely lacking. For him, she was not only a woman, but also a mentor who opened up a world of possibilities he had never dreamed of before. Their relationship was fueled not only by physical attraction, but also by a mutual need for closeness and understanding. But towns the size of Spokane do not forgive violations of unspoken rules of propriety. The scandal was gaining momentum, and everyone involved in this story would soon learn the price they would have to pay for a happiness that society considered unacceptable. In April 2024, Ethan McCabe officially moved into Diana Holland's house on South Hill. Formally, he rented a room, but informally, he became the full owner of a mansion worth $2.5 million. His belongings, a few sets of clothes, textbooks, an old laptop, were lost in the vastness of the house like drops in the ocean. Diana set up an office for him in the former guest bedroom. A new mahogany desk, an ergonomic chair, a modern computer for studying. She insisted that education was an investment in their shared future. Ethan accepted the gifts with gratitude, but every day he felt more and more like he was losing his independence. Diana made caring for him her purpose in life. She woke up at 6 in the morning to make him breakfast before his college classes. She bought expensive clothes that she thought were appropriate for a young man from her social circle. She enrolled him in a gym in an upscale neighborhood, paid for Spanish lessons, and bought a theater subscription. Ethan felt like a renovation project. Diana didn't say it directly, but he understood. She wanted to turn him into someone of her social class. Sometimes in the evenings, she would talk about what life was like with Richard, about parties for business partners, about trips to Europe. Ethan listened and understood that this was the plan for his future. Physical intimacy became a tool of control. Diana was an experienced and demanding lover. She knew how to give him pleasure and how to take it away. After arguments, she would become cold and unapproachable until he apologized and agreed with her point of view. After reconciliations, she was tender and generous, buying him gifts and making plans for the future. In early May, Diana's son arrived in Spokane. Jason Holland, 26, a successful corporate lawyer from Seattle, had not been to his parents' house since his father's funeral. The official reason for the visit was to discuss tax planning for the family business. The real reason was to talk about his mother's young lover. Jason had inherited his father's pragmatism and toughness in business matters. He had built a successful career at a large law firm, specializing in corporate law, earning $250,000 a year. Since childhood, he had known that one day he would inherit the family business, worth several $1,000,000. The meeting with Ethan took place over dinner at the house on South Hill. Diana introduced them to each other as my son Jason and my friend Ethan. The word friend sounded unnatural coming from the mouth of a 57-year-old woman talking about an 18-year-old young man who clearly did not live in the house as a guest. Jason studied Ethan with the cold gaze of a corporate lawyer accustomed to assessing people as potential assets or threats. He saw before him an attractive but clearly outsider young man who felt too comfortable in his late father's house. After dinner, when Ethan left to study for his exams, the first open conversation between mother and son in months took place. "Mom, I have to ask you directly. What's going on between you and this boy?" Diana sat up straight in her chair, preparing to defend herself. "Ethan is a good person. He helps me cope with loneliness. He's 8 years younger than me. People talk. I don't care what people say." Jason took a folder of documents out of his briefcase. "Mom, I'm your son, but I'm also the family lawyer. Father left clear instructions regarding the management of the business and the distribution of assets. If you remarry, I'm not going to remarry. But if you do, or if your relationship affects the reputation of the family and the business, the Board of Trustees has the right to review the terms of the will." Diana knew her son wasn't bluffing. Richard had created a complex asset management structure designed to protect the family capital from ill-advised decisions. Formally, she owned a controlling stake, but some decisions required the approval of a board of trustees made up of Richard's old friends and business partners. "Are you threatening your own mother?" "I'm protecting what my father built, and what I will one day inherit." The next day, Jason flew back to Seattle, but his words hung in the air like an unspoken threat. Diana knew her son wouldn't stop at words. He could convince the trustees that her relationship with Ethan threatened the family's reputation and the stability of the business. Meanwhile, Ethan's mother was facing her own problems. Sarah McCabe had worked as a social worker in Spokane for 15 years. She helped dysfunctional families, children in crisis situations, and women who were victims of domestic violence. Her profession required an impeccable reputation and the trust of the community. Her son's relationship with a wealthy widow became a topic of discussion in her professional circle. Colleagues hinted that a social worker's family should serve as an example of a healthy relationship. The management of the social services department drew attention to the inappropriate situation in the employee's personal life. Sarah's neighbors in a modest neighborhood in the north of the city looked at her with curiosity and condemnation. Women in the grocery store whispered behind her back. Her church community colleagues asked uncomfortable questions about the life choices of young people. In May, Sarah tried to talk to her son. They met at a small cafe near the college, neutral territory, free from Diana's influence and the pressure of circumstances. "Ethan, I don't understand what's going on with you. This woman is older than me." "Mom, I know what you're thinking. But Diana isn't what you think she is. She's smart, interesting. She believes in me. She's buying you, the car, the clothes, paying for your education. That's not love, that's dependence." Ethan couldn't explain to his mother that he felt needed for the first time in his life. Diana listened to his opinion on the development of the restaurant business, consulted with him on financial matters, and planned a future together. With her, he felt like a man capable of making important decisions, not a student who worked part-time as a waiter. But his dependence was indeed growing. Ethan had grown accustomed to the comfort of a large house, expensive food, and no financial worries. The thought of returning to a rented apartment with his mother, to a life of living paycheck to paycheck, seemed unbearable. Diana didn't say it directly, but he understood. Breaking up with her meant returning to his old life with no prospects. Diana was sensitive to his dependence and skillfully reinforced it. She talked about her plans to expand the business, hinted at the possibility of making him a partner after he graduated from college. She showed him photos of restaurants in other cities that she wanted to buy. She discussed investment opportunities in which he could participate. Psychologically, their relationship resembled a dance of domination and submission. Diana was an experienced manipulator, but not a malicious one. She genuinely cared about Ethan and sincerely planned a future with him. But she was used to being in control, used to having her wishes fulfilled. Ethan was a project for her to rebuild her own life. Ethan understood the mechanics of their relationship, but he couldn't resist it. Diana gave him a taste of a life he had never dreamed of. Expensive restaurants, theaters, weekend trips to Seattle or Portland, socializing with successful people from her circle, the feeling that he could become something more than the son of a single mother from a working-class neighborhood. By the end of May, their relationship had reached a critical point. Jason called his mother every week, hinting at the serious consequences of her behavior. Sarah received a verbal warning at work about the need to put her family affairs in order. The town gossip turned into open condemnation. Diana felt the ring of social pressure tightening, but she was not going to give up. She had lived 30 years in a marriage where her husband made every decision. Now, for the first time in her life, she was making her own choices. Ethan was not only her lover, but also a symbol of her independence. Ethan was torn between gratitude to the woman who had changed his life and an understanding of the price that all participants in this story were paying. He saw his mother's suffering, felt the hostility of those around him, and understood the unreality of the situation. But he also saw a future full of opportunities that would disappear if he returned to his old life. In June, an event occurred that changed the balance of power. Diana received an offer to sell one of her restaurants for $1.5 million. The buyer, a large fast food chain from Seattle, was willing to pay cash for the well-located downtown property. Diana discussed the deal with Ethan as an equal partner. She explained the financial details, showed him the documents, and asked for his opinion. For an 18-year-old who had been earning tips 6 months earlier, talking about million-dollar deals was a new reality. But there was one catch. According to Richard's will, the sale of major assets required the approval of the Board of Trustees, and the board was made up of people whom Jason could persuade to block any decision his mother made. For the first time since the beginning of their relationship, Diana faced real limitations on her power. The money she spent on Ethan, the house they lived in, the business she ran. All of this could be jeopardized by the decision of a few elderly men who considered her behavior unacceptable. The tension in the South Hill house grew day by day. Diana became more demanding of Ethan, more jealous, more controlling. Ethan felt like a beautiful bird in a golden cage. He had everything he ever wanted, but he had lost his freedom of choice. The July heat turned Spokane into a furnace. 3 air conditioners were running in the South Hill house, but the atmosphere remained heated due to Jason's constant phone calls and the growing tension between Diana and Ethan. The crisis began with an unexpected visit. On Monday, July 8th, Jason arrived from Seattle without warning. He parked his black BMW in the driveway next to his mother's Mercedes and walked up the porch with the look of a man who had come to solve problems radically. Diana met her son in the hall. Ethan was in college, summer session, extra courses in business planning, which Diana was paying for. Jason had planned the conversation for this particular time. "Mom, we need to talk seriously, without anyone else around." They went into Richard's office, which Diana had not redecorated after her husband's death. A massive oak table, leather armchairs, portraits of 3 generations of the Holland family on the walls. A place where important decisions were made and where Jason felt like the heir to family traditions. Jason took a thick folder out of his briefcase and placed it on the table. "I spoke with the board of trustees, all of them. The unanimous opinion is that your relationship with this boy jeopardizes the family's reputation and the stability of the business." Diana sat down opposite her son, instinctively straightening her back. 30 years of marriage to a tough businessman had taught her not to show weakness in important negotiations. "Jason, I'm a grown woman. My personal life..." "Your personal life has become public. Restaurant customers are discussing you and your lover. Suppliers are asking questions about the stability of the management. The bank has raised the issue of the creditworthiness of family businesses." Jason opened a folder and showed his mother printouts of emails, transcripts of telephone conversations, and newspaper clippings. Over the past few months, he had compiled a dossier on the scandal that was destroying the Holland family's reputation in Spokane's business circles. Here's a letter from the head of the Chamber of Commerce. He's concerned about the moral standards of the city's leading entrepreneurs. Here's a private investigator's report on your nighttime trips to motels with the boy. Here are photos that someone is posting on social media. Diana leafed through the documents with growing horror. Jason had turned her personal life into a court case, gathering evidence like a prosecutor preparing an indictment. "What do you want?" "Take your pick. Either you end this relationship immediately, or the Board of Trustees will activate the protective mechanisms of your father's will." Jason took the last document out of the folder, a copy of Richard Holland's will with sections highlighted. Clause 7. If the widow behaves in a manner that the Board of Trustees unanimously deems a threat to the family capital, control of the assets shall pass to the primary heir. That is, to me. Diana knew this clause existed, but never thought her son would use it against her. Richard had included this clause as a safeguard against potential fraudsters who might prey on a wealthy widow. He had not anticipated that this protective measure would become a tool for blackmail. "You have a week, Mom. Either the boy disappears from your life, or you lose the right to dispose of your father's inheritance." After Jason left, Diana was left alone with the documents that were turning her life into a legal nightmare. That evening, when Ethan returned from college, she told him the truth for the first time about the extent of the family's wealth. Sitting in the living room overlooking the illuminated garden, Diana explained the financial structure her late husband had built. 3 restaurants worth about $4 million, a house on South Hill valued at $2.5 million, an investment portfolio worth $6 million, commercial real estate in downtown Spokane worth another $3 million. Ethan listened, trying to comprehend the numbers. $15.5 million. For an 18-year-old who, 6 months ago, considered $1,000 a month salary to be good money, These amounts seemed abstract. "But there's a condition," Diana continued. "Richard's will gives me the right to use all of this, but it doesn't give me the right to dispose of it completely. Major decisions must be approved by the Board of Trustees, and now Jason has convinced them that I am acting unreasonably." Ethan realized that he had become not just the lover of a rich woman, but the center of a financial conflict in which millions of dollars were at stake. For the first time since the beginning of their relationship, he realized the real price of his presence in Diana's life. The next day, the crisis worsened. Sarah McCabe received a letter from the head of the Social Services Department demanding that she resolve the family situation that is undermining the department's authority in the community. She was given 2 weeks to bring her personal circumstances into line with professional standards. That evening, Sarah arrived at the house on South Hill. For the first time, she crossed the threshold of the mansion where her son had been living for the past 3 months. She was struck by the luxury of the surroundings. This house was worth more than she would ever earn in her entire life. The meeting took place in the same living room where Diana had told Ethan about the family's wealth the day before. Now, the two women sat on opposite sides of a coffee table worth several $1,000s, discussing the fate of the young man whom each considered her own. "Mrs. Holland, I did not come here to confront you. I came as a mother who is concerned about her child." Diana studied the woman who had raised Ethan. Sarah looked tired, aged over the past few months. Modest clothes, no jewelry, hands worn out by years of work. The contrast between them was obvious. Ethan is an adult. He makes his own decisions. He's 18. At that age, people make stupid decisions, especially when they're influenced by circumstances. Sarah didn't want to talk directly about money, but both women understood what she was referring to. Ethan had gained access to a life he never dreamed of, and that access made him dependent on a woman who could take it all away with a single decision. "What do you want from me?" "Let him come home. Give him a chance to build a normal life with people his own age. Help him find a job somewhere else if necessary. But don't ruin his future with this relationship." Diana listened to the request with a stony face. She had spent months turning Ethan into a man who could be her companion and successor in business. Now his mother was asking her to give up the plans that had become her life's purpose after her husband's death. "What if I refuse?" "Then I'll go to the police. Ethan was a minor when your relationship began. I'll find a way to prove that you started corrupting him before his 18th birthday." Sarah's threat was a bluff. She had no evidence. But Diana realized that Ethan's mother was willing to do anything to get her son back. After Sarah left, Ethan and Diana openly discussed the future of their relationship for the first time. Ethan admitted that he felt pressure from all sides. His mother had threatened to cut off all contact with him. His college classmates looked at him as if he were a kept man. Diana's neighbors had stopped greeting them. "Maybe we should take a break," Ethan suggested cautiously. "Wait until things cool down." Diana's reaction was immediate and harsh. She got up from her chair, walked over to the window, and stood silently for a few minutes, looking out at the garden. When she turned around, her face was as cold as ice. "If you leave, don't expect to come back. I don't tolerate betrayal." In the days that followed, Diana started a financial war. She canceled Ethan's college tuition payments, blocked the credit card she had given him for personal expenses, and demanded that he return her gifts. When Ethan tried to collect his belongings, it turned out that most of his clothes had been bought with her money and legally belonged to her. Ethan realized that during his months living in the South Hill house, he had completely lost his financial independence. He had no savings, no job, not even suitable clothes for job interviews. Diana had turned him into a well-dressed prisoner who couldn't leave without losing everything. At the same time, pressure began to mount from the other side. Jason hired a private investigator who followed Ethan's every move. Photos of his meetings with his mother, college visits, and shopping trips were regularly added to the compromising folder that Jason was preparing for the Board of Trustees. In mid-July, an incident occurred that showed how dangerous the situation had become. Ethan met with his mother at a cafe to discuss the possibility of reconciliation. The private investigator photographed their conversation and gave the photos to Jason as proof that the boy was plotting against the family. Jason interpreted the meeting as an attempt by Ethan and his mother to conspire against Diana in order to get a share of the inheritance. In his paranoid logic, the poor family was trying to deceive the rich widow by using the son's sexual services. The ultimatum was delivered through a law firm. Ethan received an official letter demanding that he immediately cease all contact with Diana Holland under threat of legal action for fraud and extortion. Jason used the full arsenal of corporate law to intimidate the 18-year-old. Sarah also received a letter threatening legal action for conspiracy to commit fraud. Jason demanded that the McKay family disappear from his mother's life forever. By the end of July, the situation had reached a boiling point. Diana locked herself in her house on South Hill, refusing to answer her son's calls or meet with the Board of Trustees. Ethan was torn between his wealthy lover's house and his mother's modest apartment, unable to make a choice that would ruin his life either way. Sarah received a final warning at work. Either she resolved the family problem within a week or lose her job. 15 years of impeccable service could be wiped out by a scandal she had no control over. Jason scheduled a meeting of the Board of Trustees for August 2nd. There was only one item on the agenda: to strip Diana of her right to manage the family assets on the grounds of unreasonable behavior threatening the interests of the family. Everyone involved in this story understood that the time for compromise was over. Too much had been said, too many threats had been made, and the stakes were too high. Someone had to give in, but no one wanted to be the first. On the night of August 1st, Ethan couldn't sleep in his room in the house on South Hill. Outside the window lay a perfectly manicured garden, expensive clothes hung in the closet, and the latest laptop sat on the table. All the symbols of the life he dreamed of. But he knew that this life could disappear at any moment, at the whim of people who considered him a threat to their world. He thought of his mother, who could lose her job because of him. Of Diana, who could lose control of the business that was her only connection to her late husband. About Jason, who saw him as an enemy threatening the family inheritance. Thursday, August 1st, 2024. 11:47 p.m. Diana Holland lay on the marble floor of her South Hill kitchen in a pool of blood. A blow to the back of the head with a heavy object proved fatal, cracking her skull and damaging her brain tissue. Death was instantaneous. The $20,000 kitchen island, where she had so often eaten breakfast alone after her husband's death, was the last thing she saw. The French windows to the garden were open. The August heat made the house stuffy even with the air conditioning on. A broken crystal decanter lay on the granite countertop, the very one Richard had brought back from a trip to Ireland 10 years ago. The shards were mixed with blood, turning the kitchen into a scene of violence that contrasted with the immaculate order of the rest of the house. The body was discovered by the maid, Maria Gonzalez, at 8:30 a.m. on Friday. She had been working in the house for 3 years, coming twice a week to clean. She had her own key and the code to the alarm system. Diana usually greeted her in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and a list of tasks for the day. Maria entered through the front door, turned off the alarm, and headed for the kitchen. The scream she let out when she saw her employer's body was heard by neighbors through their open windows. The woman ran Thompson out of the house and called 911 with trembling hands, incoherently explaining to the dispatcher what had happened. The first patrol car arrived 4 minutes later. Officer Michael Thompson, who had served with the Spokane Police Department for 12 years, immediately realized that he was dealing with a murder. He cordoned off the crime scene, called in detectives and forensic experts, and began questioning the maid. At 9:15 a.m., Detective Rita Morales arrived on the scene. 42 years old, 15 years on the force, the last 7 in the homicide division. She had seen many violent crimes, but a murder in a house worth several $1 million was a rarity for Spokane. Morales methodically examined the crime scene. There were no signs of forced entry. The alarm had been disabled from the inside. Either the killer knew the code, or Diana had let him in herself. There were no signs of a struggle in the house, except in the kitchen. Valuables were untouched. Jewelry in the bedroom, cash in the safe, expensive electronics in the living room. "This isn't a robbery," she said to the forensic technician photographing the body. The killer knew the victim. Maria's preliminary testimony provided the first clues. The maid mentioned a young man who had been living in the house for the past few months, the owner's son, who often called and argued with his mother, and a woman who came last week and talked loudly with the owner. By noon, Detective Morales had compiled a list of prime suspects: Ethan McCabe, a young lover with financial motives; Jason Holland, a son with inheritance interests; Sarah McCabe, a mother who threatened to expose him. Ethan was the first to be called in for questioning. He was found at Spokane Community College, where he was taking a microeconomics exam. The student seemed shocked by the news of Diana's death, but Detective Morales knew that shock could be either genuine or feigned. The interrogation took place in a small room at the West Broadway precinct. Ethan sat across from the detective, clenching and unclenching his fists. His lawyer was not present. He insisted he had nothing to hide. "Tell me about your relationship with Mrs. Holland." "We were dating for almost a year." "Dating? She was 39 years older than you." "Age didn't matter. She understood me." Morales studied the young man. Expensive clothes, well-groomed appearance, confident manner, the result of months of living in a wealthy home. But his eyes betrayed his fear. He understood the situation he was in. "Where were you last night between 10 p.m. and midnight?" "At home. At Diana's house. I was preparing for an exam." "Who can confirm that?" Ethan fell silent. In recent weeks, he and Diana had hardly spoken due to constant conflicts. They lived in the same house, but like strangers. Last night, he locked himself in his room with his textbooks, while she stayed downstairs. "She was alive when I went to bed around 11. I could hear the TV on in the living room." "And in the morning?" "In the morning, I left for college at 7:30. I didn't wake her up." Morales wrote down his statement, noting the inconsistencies to herself. If the murder happened around midnight and Ethan left at 7 in the morning, he had enough time to kill Diana and stage an alibi. "Tell me about your relationship with Jason Holland." "He hated me. He thought I was using his mother for money." "Is that true?" Ethan was silent for a long time, choosing his words carefully. "Diana changed my life. She gave me opportunities I never dreamed of. But I didn't ask her for that, and I loved her." "Even when you found out about the will and the millions?" The blow hit its mark. Ethan blushed and looked away. "I only found out about the money last week. Before that, I knew she was rich, but not that rich." "And how did you react?" "I understood why Jason hated me so much. $15.5 million is a serious motive for murder." The detective put down her pen and looked closely at the young man. "You're talking about a motive for murder. Whose murder, Mr. McCabe?" "Mine," Ethan replied quietly. "Jason saw me as a threat to the family inheritance. If Diana had married me or left me part of the money." "Was she going to?" "We didn't talk about it, but I knew she was serious about our future." After 2 hours of questioning, Ethan was released, but warned not to leave town. Next, Jason Holland was called in. The victim's son had flown in from Seattle on the morning flight and went straight to the police station with his lawyer. Jason was deliberately calm. A $3,000 suit, an expensive watch, the confident manner of a corporate lawyer. He expressed his condolences to the family and was willing to cooperate with the investigation, but every word was filtered through legal caution. "My mother and I didn't always agree, but I loved her." "You didn't always agree. Was that about her relationship with Ethan McKay? I thought the relationship was inappropriate. My mother was vulnerable after my father's death, and the young man took advantage of her condition. So much so that you threatened to strip your mother of her right to run the family business? Jason's lawyer put his hand on his client's shoulder, but he continued to answer. My father's will included safeguards against unreasonable decisions. I acted in the best interests of the family. Where were you last night? In Seattle. I worked until 9 p.m., then had dinner with colleagues at Canlis Restaurant. I have receipts and witnesses. Morales knew the alibi could be verified, but the distance between Seattle and Spokane was a 4-hour drive. Theoretically, Jason could have driven to Spokane after dinner, killed his mother, and returned by morning. When was the last time you spoke to your mother? On Tuesday. I called to remind her about today's board meeting. How did she react? She said she didn't recognize the board's right to interfere in her personal life. She threatened to sue me personally. Did you argue? Jason showed emotion for the first time, clenching his jaw and frowning. My mother accused me of betrayal. She said I was worse than a stranger because I was using my father's love against her. And what did you say? That I love her, but I won't let her destroy what my father built. Sarah McCabe was the last to be questioned. Ethan's mother looked exhausted. Sleepless nights, stress at work, and constant worry for her son had turned her into a shadow of her former confident self. Sarah honestly recounted her visit to Diana, her attempts to convince her son to break off the relationship, and her threats to go to the police with a report of corruption of a minor. It was a bluff, she admitted. I had no proof, but I was willing to do anything to save my son. Save him from what? From addiction. That woman turned him into her kept man. He lost the ability to make his own decisions. Where were you last night? At home. I watched TV and went to bed early. My neighbors can confirm that I didn't leave the house. Do you have a car? An old Honda, but I didn't drive anywhere after work. Morales noted that Sarah also had no reliable alibi. Neighbors could see her car in the driveway, but they wouldn't know if she was home all night. By Friday evening, the detective had 3 versions with 3 suspects, each of whom had a motive and opportunity. Ethan could have killed Diana out of fear of losing his financial well-being or under pressure from family circumstances. Jason could have killed his mother to guarantee control of the inheritance. Sarah could have killed the woman who, in her opinion, ruined her son's life. Forensic scientists found traces of all 3 suspects at the crime scene, which was natural. Each of them had been in the house in recent weeks. Fingerprints, hair, and DNA traces did not provide a clear answer as to the identity of the killer. The murder weapon, a crystal decanter, belonged to Diane herself. This meant that it was a spontaneous crime, not a premeditated murder. The killer used whatever was at hand at the moment of conflict. Neighbors did not hear any screams or sounds of a struggle. The house on South Hill stood on a large plot of land with neighboring mansions far away. Someone could have arrived, killed Diana, and left without attracting attention. On Saturday morning, Morales received a preliminary forensic report. Diana died between 11:30 p.m. and 12:30 a.m. The blow came from behind while she had her back to the attacker. There were no defensive wounds. She did not expect to be attacked. The detective sat in her office studying the case files, crime scene photos, witness statements, reports on the family's financial situation. Somewhere among these documents lay the key to solving the case. The murder of Diana Holland became the top news story in Spokane. The local media presented the story as the tragedy of a wealthy widow and her young lover. Public opinion was divided. Some considered Ethan a victim of circumstance, while others saw him as a calculating murderer. Diana's funeral was scheduled for Monday. Jason organized the ceremony at a prestigious church in the city center. Ethan didn't know whether to attend. Formally, he wasn't a member of the family, but he had spent the last year of Diana's life with her. Detective Morales planned to attend the funeral. Killers sometimes come to say goodbye to their victims, and their behavior can give investigators new leads. On Sunday evening, she reviewed all the case files once again. 3 suspects, 3 motives, many contradictions in the testimonies. But one of them was lying. One of them had taken a crystal decanter on Thursday night and struck Diana Holland on the head with such force that her skull cracked. Tomorrow, at the funeral, she would look closely at each of the suspects. The killer might give himself away with a careless word, a gesture, a glance. 15 years as a detective had taught her to read people like open books. The case of Diana Holland's murder was far from over, but Rita Morales knew that the truth always comes out. All it takes is patience and attention. Monday, August 5th. Diana Holland's funeral. Detective Rita Morales stood at the back of St. Patrick's Church, watching the mourners. 300 people had come to say goodbye to the woman who had become the center of a city scandal. Business partners, restaurant customers, members of charitable organizations, and simply curious onlookers. Jason Holland sat in the front row in a black suit, accepting condolences with the dignity of a man raised in the traditions of high society. Next to him was an empty seat, officially for other family members, but in reality, a demonstration that Ethan McCabe was not considered part of the family, even after a year of relationship with the deceased. Ethan sat in the middle of the hall, alone. He wore the black suit Diana had bought him 3 months ago for business meetings. He wasn't crying, but his face was pale and his hands were shaking. Morales noted that he avoided looking at the coffin. Sarah McCabe came in a modest black dress and sat in the back row. She did not approach her son. Their relationship remained strained after months of conflict over his relationship with Diana. The woman looked exhausted, having aged 10 years in the last few days. After the ceremony, Morales approached Ethan in the parking lot. "Mr. McCabe, I need to ask you a few more questions." "Now?" "At the station. It will take a little time." Ethan looked at the detective's black sedan, then at the people leaving the cemetery. Many of them glanced at him suspiciously. For the residents of Spokane, he remained the prime suspect in the murder of the woman who had supported him. "Okay, but I want a lawyer." At the station, Morales laid out the new evidence she had gathered over the weekend on the table. Bank statements, phone records, witness statements. 3 days of intensive work had yielded new information about the last days of Diana Holland's life. "Mr. McCabe, tell me about the afternoon of July 31st. What was going on in the house?" Ethan's lawyer, a young court-appointed defense attorney, listened carefully to each question. Ethan was more nervous than he had been during the first interview. "A normal day. Diana was stressed about tomorrow's board meeting." "And in the evening?" "We hardly spoke. She was in the living room. I was preparing for an exam." Morales took out a bank statement. On Wednesday morning, Diana withdrew $50,000 in cash from her account. "What for?" Ethan turned pale. "I don't know." "You don't know? The woman you live with withdraws that amount of money, and you're not interested in why." "We haven't discussed financial matters lately." The detective took out a second piece of paper, a printout of phone calls. On Wednesday at 2:30 p.m., Diana called the law firm of Baxter Partners. The conversation lasted 43 minutes. "Do you know what they talked about?" "No." "She wanted to change her will. Attorney Mark Baxter confirmed that Diana planned to include you in the list of heirs, 50% of all her assets." The silence in the room became oppressive. Ethan's lawyer leaned toward his client and whispered something. Ethan shook his head. "Mr. McCabe, $7.5 million. That's a lot of money for an 18-year-old. "I didn't know about it." "You didn't know? Then explain it." Morales pulled out the last piece of evidence, a printout of an internet search from Ethan's computer. On Wednesday evening, he had searched for information about Washington state inheritance law, the timing of inheritance, and taxes on large inheritances. "The computer in your room, Mr. McCabe. Search history from 9:15 to 10:40 p.m. on Wednesday, July 31st. Ethan clenched his fists and looked away. For the first time in all the interrogations, he had been caught in a direct lie. Okay, yes, I knew. Diana told me on Wednesday night. She decided to change the will to protect our relationship. And how did you react? I was surprised, but also happy. It meant we had a future. Morales leaned back in her chair. 15 years as a detective had taught her to sense when a suspect was telling the truth, but not the whole truth. Mr. McCabe, on Thursday evening, a note from Diana was found in your room, written in her own hand. Would you like to know what it said? The detective took out a plastic bag containing a sheet of expensive paper. It was Diana's handwriting, familiar to Ethan from the dozens of notes she had left him during the months they had lived together. Ethan, I've changed my mind. Meeting with Jason showed me that my choice is destroying our family. Tomorrow, I will tell the Board of Trustees that I am ending our relationship. You will receive $100,000 and help getting into a good university in another state. It's best for both of us. Diana. Ethan looked at the note as if it were a death sentence. The lawyer asked for a recess to consult with his client, but Morales continued to press him. She changed her mind, Mr. McCabe. $7.5 million turned into $100,000 and a one-way ticket out of Spokane. How did you react? I didn't know she wrote that. The note was on your desk. Diana put it there on Thursday evening while you were in the kitchen. Morales pulled out a diagram of the house with the bloodstains marked by the forensic team. On Thursday at 11:45 p.m., you went down to the kitchen. Diana was standing by the window looking out at the garden. You approached her from behind and hit her on the head with a decanter. No. After the blow, you went up to your room, found the note, and tore it up. But not completely. The forensic team reconstructed the text from the pieces in the wastebasket. The lawyer asked to stop the interrogation, but Ethan suddenly spoke up. You don't understand. She promised me a future, and then decided to throw me away like a used thing. $100,000 for a year of humiliation. Humiliation? All these months I was her toy. She dressed me like a doll. She showed me off to her friends like an exotic pet. She bought me things and reminded me that it all belonged to her. Ethan stood up and began pacing the room. Months of pent-up anger burst forth. I thought we were building a relationship, but she was just building entertainment for a rich widow. When she got bored, she decided to get rid of me. And you killed her. I didn't plan it. I went downstairs to talk to her to try to change her mind. She had her back to me. She didn't even turn around. She said, "The decision has been made, Ethan. Tomorrow you're moving in with your mother." And then you grabbed the decanter. It was on the table. I just couldn't go back to my old life. I couldn't go back to being a nobody after what she showed me. Ethan sat back down and covered his face with his hands. I loved her, but I hated what she did to me. She turned me into a dependent person and then decided to throw me away. The lawyer tried to stop his client, but it was too late. The confession was being recorded on camera, every word becoming evidence of guilt. After the blow, I realized she was dead. I went up to the room, found the note, and tore it up. I thought no one would find out about her decision to change her will. But the note wasn't enough. I had to get rid of the other evidence. What evidence? Morales showed the last photo, traces on the garden path behind the house. After the murder, you took the bloody clothes through the French doors into the garden. You burned them in the barbecue in the backyard. But you didn't notice that you left bloodstains on the path. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. And in the morning you went to college as if nothing had happened. I hoped it looked like an accident or a robbery. Ethan McKay was arrested at 4:30 p.m. that same day. The charge, first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. The young man, who a year ago had been an ordinary student working part-time as a waiter, was taken away in handcuffs to the county jail. News of the arrest spread instantly throughout Spokane. Local media reported the story as a tragedy of greed, but many residents sympathized with the young man who had fallen victim to circumstances. Sarah McCabe received the news of her son's arrest at work. She was sitting in her office at the Department of Social Services, preparing documents for a termination of parental rights case, when Detective Morales called. "Mrs. McCabe, your son has been arrested on suspicion of murdering Diana Holland. He has made a full confession." Sarah didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just hung up the phone, gathered her things, and wrote a letter of resignation. After 15 years of impeccable service, she couldn't continue working with families in crisis when her own family had become the center of a criminal scandal. Jason Holland learned of the arrest from the family lawyer. He was sitting in his office in Seattle, preparing for a board of trustees meeting that was now unnecessary. His mother's death automatically transferred control of the family assets to him. "Mr. Holland, the charges are very serious. McCabe will most likely receive a life sentence." Jason felt no satisfaction that his suspicions had been confirmed. His mother was dead, the family business needed urgent management, and the Holland name was now associated with scandal throughout the Northwest. Ethan McCabe's trial took place in October 2024. The defense tried to portray him as a victim of psychological manipulation by an older woman, but the confession and evidence were irrefutable. The prosecutor presented the case as a cold-blooded murder for financial gain. The young man killed the woman who was supporting him when he learned that he would lose access to millions of dollars. Ethan received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. At 18, his life was effectively over within the walls of a Washington state prison. Sarah sold the house in Spokane and moved in with her sister in Oregon. She didn't visit her son in prison for the first 2 years. She couldn't look at the man she had raised, knowing he was capable of murder. Jason sold his mother's restaurant business to a large California chain. The house on South Hill was put up for sale, but no buyers were found. Its reputation as a murder house scared off potential owners. Detective Rita Morales received praise from police leadership for her quick resolution of the high-profile case. But she felt no pride in her success. Too many lives had been destroyed because of toxic relationships between people who were not right for each other. The story of Diana Holland and Ethan McCabe served as a warning to the residents of Spokane about the price of forbidden love. The difference in age, social status, and life experience created an explosive mixture that led to tragedy. A year after the murder, the house on South Hill finally found a buyer. The new owners completely renovated the kitchen where the murder took place, but the neighbors still called it the Holland House. Ethan McCabe spent his first 5 years in prison, refusing to be interviewed by journalists and writers who wanted to tell his story. He studied law by correspondence, hoping to find grounds for appeal, but he had no chance of being released. In a small town where everyone knows each other, scandals are not forgotten. Diana Holland's name became synonymous with reckless passion, and Ethan McCabe's name became a warning about what greed disguised as love can lead to.